If you grew up in Ireland during the early 2000s, you probably remember The Den. It was this children's programming block on RTE2. We didn't have satellite in my house, so no Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon. This meant I did miss out on the likes of Danny Phantom, Ben 10 and Samurai Jack, but thanks to The Den, we got Jackie Chan Adventures, Quiz Zone, and a whole lot of stuff from the 40s because Irish television really couldn't afford that much. All this diversity of shows was more than enough for my small mind to be blown. It was hectic, and it was so much fun. You'd never really know what you'd find on it any particular day, and that was what was exciting about it, having all these, at the time, radically different stuff to pick from before we'd eventually got the internet and I'd start seeing more stuff on sites like Newgrounds and the early days of YouTube. But out of all of these, my absolute favourite show from this period was probably one you're all familiar with. And that show was Yu-Gi-Oh!
It's time to duel!
Free 30, every day after primary school, I was there and never missed an episode. It was literally all I could talk about. This was the time when trading card games hit big with the mainstream with the success of Pokemon and other shows licensed by Invisible Gun approved 4Kids Entertainment. The anime boom was in full swing, an era when you could go to the playground with a big ring binder full of TCGs and it was just accepted as this common thing. All this nostalgic stuff aside, the show itself, despite the ludicrous amounts of censorship and editing to make it suit a much younger audience, I loved it. This was my first real exposure to anime, and I knew there was something different about it. I liked the scarier, more edgy monster designs compared to the other cartoons of this time, and how the main character Yugi was always able to pull out a win, no matter how bad the odds were. Having this seemingly perfect protagonist who could sort every issue or conflict through sheer willpower or strength was something that was really great for a younger me, as it provided this kind of role model. These kinds of figures were something for us to aspire to. But as you grow older and you start to see the world in clearer detail outside the comforts of your own home, you soon realize how these idealized images of perfect heroes are honestly kind of boring. And I think as we move through life, we want more characters to reflect who we are. Someone may be going through similar struggles as we do, and occasionally seeing them fail or do wrong could do so much more for us to get invested in their struggles. To return back to Yu-Gi-Oh!, the one episode that always stuck out to me was Season 4's The Fate of the Pharaoh, in which Yami is locked into this battle with one of the Doma's strongest swordsmen, Raphael, who has him on the defensive, encouraging him to give into his darker impulses and activate the Seal of Orichalcos. From this point on, he starts discarding his monsters without a care, without considering any of the consequences. He disregards all the previous virtues, only focusing on what true power is. Through this selfishness and arrogance, it ends up with him losing. And yes, while this technically isn't the first time this has happened, the fact it was this mean-spirited, the fact Yugi sacrificed himself to let the Pharaoh escape and deal with the ramifications of what he just did, this was really shocking to a younger me. And look, no joke, this arc is kinda shit. I remember watching the abridged series and realizing how many ass-pull plot solutions there were, and if you've watched the recent Mother's Basement video, there's some really outlandish aspects to the series world building that flew completely over my head. But witnessing these seemingly perfect/powerful characters give in to their darker impulses and have to deal with the ramifications of these actions was something that would eventually lead me to discover other characters who would serve as a better example of what main protagonists could represent, especially in a very different era of my life. So let's wind the clock forward a bit to present day. Quarantine has given me a lot of time to reflect on stuff. I've made an effort to become more physically active, attempt the daunting task of clearing my room, but it's also given me the opportunity to work through the backlog of books and films around the house. But as always, I end up buying more stuff and adding to the never-ending pile. I think this excess and spare time had me wondering about the kinds of stuff I used to watch or read as a teenager and how, in the time since, I've changed, as I believe personal growth is important for us to improve as people, and revisiting old favorites can reveal a lot about how far we've come. But there was this real trepidation in going back to some of these pieces of media, as the way in which we view them can change significantly. Like, many of the films, shows, and books I watched back then were pure escapism, something I wanted to lose myself in to distract from general worries about the world and not having to communicate with people. Sometimes they were good. My favorite movie at 11 is still my favorite at 21, but others were bad. Like, really, really bad. Which comes not just from age but also perspective. As you grow and change, the way in which you view things also changes, and that can be scary. But there was also this rare case of coming across that one show that actually got better. One series that stuck with me despite many of the others slowly fading from memory. A series that many people still hold a grudge against to this day, but meant something more to a shy teenaged me. And that show was The Legend of Korra. Korra was without a doubt one of my favorite shows as a teenager, and with no real knowledge of the online discourse surrounding the show's initial run, I was in love with its world and specifically its cast of likable but also flawed heroes. If there was one thing I was really craving during this period was stuff that actively felt more grown up than the quote, adult cartoons of this era. You probably know the kind I'm talking about. But one thing I want to make clear with this paragraph is that there's a big difference between being an adult and being mature. Once you hit the age of 18, you're essentially seen as an adult by society and have to adjust accordingly. It's not hard to be an adult in your content. You can throw in as much swears and nudity as you'd like, but that means nothing without having the heart or care to deal with these issues that you're wanting to preach, leading to this dull period of things trying to sound nuanced and deep when they simply were not. And sometimes you'd find a few diamonds in the rough, but it was their ability to be mature that made them stand out. Maturity is having this ability to take difficult subject matter and not feed it through an artificial tube. A certain amount of this comes from the stigma of adult cartoons having to be ugly and only focused on comedy, which is such a limited mindset that doesn't really take advantage of its own medium. Which is what made The Legend of Korra, despite its lower age rating compared to many of its contemporaries, felt more mature, like it had this edge to it. It was one of those shows that was never afraid to deal with issues such as racism, fascism, or the idea of what freedom actually means without having to sugarcoat its message to sell to a younger audience. This kind of progressionist messaging was definitely met with repercussions from its network, as the show initially aired in the coveted Saturday morning slot, but after killing off a significant character on screen during its season 1 finale, coupled with a lot of the previously mentioned themes and ideals, the show was moved to a late Friday night slot, and eventually Nickelodeon pulled the show from broadcasting entirely, with its last 2 seasons airing online only. So, yeah, Korra had a lot going against it, not just from a network that didn't support it, but how the series' rushed production was done before streaming services took off, hurting the overall pace, especially in how some of its ideas simply weren't given the time to breathe. But there was also something else that's a bit difficult to really measure, but I think that a large majority of the fanbase really wanted another Last Airbender, or a continuation with those particular characters they grew up with. Which, in concept, does have potential. So many decades-old franchises in the last few decades love to age up their characters, reconstructing their genre conventions to fit into new contexts, and seeing old heroes in new lights can lead to some really fascinating dissections on who these people are. But I'd argue it isn't always necessary. And this might just be me, but when the credits rolled on the final episode, that was enough. I had been on this journey, and seeing the cast going through their arcs was satisfying. There's obviously more that happens after the end. As with life, things can't be tied up with a ribbon without any consequences. And while there is extended material for those who want it, I didn't really need it as much as I once did, because certain stories are more important to us at particular points in our lives, maybe providing a comfort or a moral message for us to learn about. But that connection sometimes will change, whether it's in the people we meet or the situations we are in. Things are constantly in flux. Coming back to this series as an adult, you do see a lot more of the cracks in the foundation, but compared to the other shows that eventually faded from memory, this didn't happen with Korra. And a big part of that was her personal journey. The first thing that's going to hit anyone coming to this show for the first time is that Korra is nothing like Aang. And this isn't just with the change in time and gender, but also, more importantly, in attitude. While Aang was this kind, caring boy coming to terms with his responsibilities, Korra, on the other hand, is this cocky teenage girl who frequently shows disdain towards her teachers, already mastered three of the elements, and sporting a more aggressive fighting style compared to her predecessor. This was more than enough to establish this wasn't your dad's show. Literally, that first frame in which he's introduced is the whole thesis statement for her character.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Having this outwardly more flawed main character, I think, leads to people being more dismissive about Korra as a protagonist, because so many fantasy shows want to put their heroes in a more virtuous light possible. But in many ways, I think this change is what makes Korra's slow transformation from immaturity to selflessness more satisfying, as we already have this idea of how different she is from the established mold. For an excellent example of evolving protagonists, look no further than JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, as its switching of genres and settings allows the different main characters to shine, especially in how radically different they are from one another. Like, Jonathan is this kind gentleman who strives to always do the right thing. Compare this to Part 7's Johnny, whose stubborn and selfish demeanor is molded by his bleak outlook on life. Having this change of protagonist helps not only with introducing new characters, but also having the landscape of the world and its views feel more earned as we see the changes occur. So we already have this idea of how different Korra is to her predecessors, not only being isolated from the rest of the world and being kept under strict supervision. It's easy to see the expectations set upon her in this new era, and her lack of knowledge of the world are things she has to work towards to improve as a person. Which leads to the other aspect of the show that makes her unique, in that it takes this confident, powerful character and rakes her through the mud. At seemingly every point in her journey, Korra is met with some form of adversary, not just from the antagonists of each respective book, but from all around her, people in the streets to higher up figures in the world, and occasionally falling out with her own friends. When you look at how different the settings and respective tones are of both series, seeing how the world treats its main characters can be quite jarring. Aang had to become the Avatar in a world that needed him, while Korra wants to be the Avatar in a world that doesn't want her at all. And despite all this, she perseveres. It's a long road to improve, but she always does her best for those around her. Slowly but surely, through all these hardships and experiences, she improves as a person and as an icon. It looked like the positive transformation will change her into a better person, and nothing would change that course. But sometimes life throws a brick wall in your face. The one episode that always stuck out to me was chapter 13 of book 3, titled Venom of the Red Lotus, in which Korra is captured by the titular terrorist group, poisoned to near death so the antagonists can end the Avatar cycle. In comparison to that previous Yu-Gi-Oh moment I referenced earlier, through the help of her friends and power she does win, but it's different. This traumatic experience has changed her. All this conflict, all this negativity has finally cracked her armor. And it's clear this isn't something that can be talked through or healed with medicine, it's just something that's stuck with her. You can't climb this mountain and expect to be cured by the end of it. This feeling of failure or not progressing is something you live with every day, forever a part of you, like the clothes you wear. It's not something that goes away. Some days are good, some days are bad, and when I saw this scene, it hit differently than it did before. I was very quiet as a teenager. Being on the spectrum in an all-boys secondary school, I often felt out of touch with my peers. I was more comfortable by myself than with others. And while I did have friends, it was something that couldn't really help with this constant feeling of not progressing. And it wouldn't be till years later, as I broke out of that shell, did I start to see things about the world, and this is how my relationship with this wonderful show changed. What's truly inspiring about Korra is that she does get knocked down again and again. She loses and often questions herself. But slowly through that pain, she gets back up. Through her efforts and with her friends, she confronts this trauma. And while it doesn't go away, it's something that she learns to deal with and carry that pain to make her stronger. That's a message that didn't just help me at a particular point in my life, but has helped me throughout all of my life. I've learned to carry that pain, and it's helped make me into the person that I am today, and I wouldn't change a thing about that. When we hit our lowest points, we are the most open to change. Korra did not set the world on fire like its predecessor, and you know what? That's okay. Not every piece of art should be put on the same pedestal of quality, as everything is created under different circumstances with different intentions, because perfection is kinda boring. Those imperfections are the things that make us unique. Whether it's something popular or not, art is something that impacts us all differently. And seeing this series, however brief it was, change me and other people is genuinely beautiful. It lit the fuse that allowed for so many other shows to learn from its mistakes and become better because of it. And it's kind of insane how we went from this to this.
Don't you get it? I love you. I always have. So please, just this once. Stay.
No matter of the problems that are present or the setbacks plaguing its creation, this show left an impact on me, and I think that means something. No matter how much the world knocks you down, no matter how much it may seem impossible to push forward, there's always something to strive towards, and I can't give it any higher praise than that. So, thank you, Korra. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to watch another one of Comiskey's projects. I was generally surprised by the nice comments and reception to that Prince of Egypt video. Sure, 58 views doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it was more than I was expecting. I could definitely say animation isn't going to be the focus of the channel, as I want to use it as a platform for all the kind of stuff I'd be into, and hopefully we'll have fun doing it. If you somehow want to hear more from me, you can check out the Talking Crap About podcast or whatever social media site you prefer down below in the description. But that brings our broadcast to a close. Until next time, stay safe everyone.